Well, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. We're from NQA, UK certification body, and just to make sure that you're going to get what you expect, this afternoon we're going to be looking at the benefits of integrating your management systems. So I'm Richard Walsh, and joining me online this afternoon is Terry Fisher.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody.
We're the two principal assessors for NQA. I look after energy and environment, and Terry looks after occupational health and safety. Couple of slides right at the start that I always sort of joke that we're contractually obliged to show you. Just a little bit about who we are, where we are in the world, the main offices that we've got, and some of the sectors that we specialise in. Many sectors: quality aerospace, environment, energy, health, safety, and so on and so on. We're not going to be specifically looking at any of those this afternoon, but we're going to look at how it might work and the benefits of maybe grouping some of those together into an integrated management system. A little bit there about the training courses that we offer, both in the UK and of course they're available to anybody around the world. That's me, and that's Terry. Good afternoon. I recognise a couple of the names, a couple of people that I've worked with in the past on the attendance, and a couple of people who are not currently in the UK, particularly Mike. Good afternoon, Mike, down in South Africa. How are you getting on? Keep following you on Facebook, seeing what you're up to. Anyway, so this afternoon, the plan is that it should last about 45 minutes. So where we are now, it's just after 2 o'clock. We'll try and get the presentation bit done by quarter to 3. And then there's a chance for any questions that you might like to ask. However, we want it to be as involved as we can. So if you've got any questions as we're going along, you should have on the screen a question box. If you type any questions in there, we'll try and get to them if we think it's relevant to what we're currently talking about. So type your questions in there, and one or other of us will answer those as we go through. There's no need to try and scribble down everything we're saying or copy all the slides. Everybody who attends, in fact everybody who's registered, will get a PDF version of all of the slides, and also a link to a recording of this webinar, which will be posted on our YouTube channel, but we'll send you a link so that if you enjoyed it that much, you can listen to it again. Okay, so as we see there, you can put a name to the face. So that's the two of us, and as I say, there is the ability to engage with us and to ask questions as we go along. So hopefully what we're going to try and cover this afternoon, a little bit about what forms the basis of all of these standards, Annex SL, and also a little bit about PAS 99, although we don't come across PAS 99 very often now, the different combinations of standards, why we should think about integrating standards. If we do integrate, what will be the benefits? Maybe what's the best way to think of integration? What's the best model to consider? And then some different areas that are common to all of the standards and the areas that are different. And certainly to have some discussion around those particular areas. I'll keep on going. Hi, David. Happy to join. Thank you. Thank you, David, in Kenya. A true global audience this afternoon. Thank you. You're most welcome, David. So Annex SL. Annex SL doesn't stand for anything apparently, SL, but it was published in 2011, so it's about 10 years old now, and it actually provides the high-level structure for all of the ISO management standards. It's a little bit like scaffolding, or maybe the steelwork in a building. It provides a common form upon which then all of the other sections of the standard, all of the other standards are actually hung, if you like. It replaced what was known as Guide 83, which was the older version. So Annex SL has streamlined all of the standards, has encouraged standardization. So as I say, all of the new standards, whether it's 9001, 45,001, 14,001, 22,000 for food safety, they all follow the same structure. And that structure being what we see on the screen there. 10 clauses, and what we would term the auditable clauses are clauses 4 to 10. And where possible, the clauses have identical core text, no matter which standard they're applied to. And they all try and share common terms and common core definitions. So Annex SL has done a lot of the hard work for people in terms of integrating the standards. One of the things I always try and point out when I show this slide is Clause 1 scope does not refer to the scope of your management system. If you're familiar with standards, you'll know that Clause 1 refers to the scope of whatever standard it is you're looking at. So Clause 1 of 14,001 basically just says that the standard is there to manage the environmental impact of businesses and to encourage continual improvement. So it's talking about what the standard is covering, not scope as in the scope of your management system. I will hand over to Terry shortly. I'm just going to get these first couple of slides out the way. Just so that you're ready, Terry, if you can pick up on the next slide after this one, which is popular combinations. So one of the standards that we do sometimes come across and people ask about is PAS 99. PAS stands for Publicly Available Specification. Always a bit of a joke because you're still to buy them, even though they're publicly available. But PAS 99 sort of does what Annex SL set out to do. It highlighted the common elements and looked at how to integrate them and made sure that all of the standard requirements are covered with one set of policies and one set of procedures, and looks at how you can audit more than one system at a time, improve overall efficiency, defines roles and responsibilities, highlights the common objectives within the standards, and ultimately makes it easier to continually improve. The publishing of Annex SL sort of shuffled PAS 99 into the background, and it's hardly ever used. I've put a slide in there because we have been asked about it in the past, but really, if you want my honest opinion, I would forget about PAS 99 and concentrate on using the Annex SL format as the basis for fully integrating all of your systems. Right, Terry, do you want to just pick up a little bit on this one?
Yeah, certainly. So in here, we'll talk about the sort of most popular, the trilogy of the most popular systems, although other management standards are becoming increasingly popular, especially 27001. But we'll look at, you know, there's combinations between 9001, which is obviously quality management, and ISO 14001, which is environmental, and the various variations on a theme. So 9 and 45, which brings in quality and health and safety, environmental and health and safety, with 14 and 45, and 14 and 50,001, looking at asset management, etc. So all the range of management system standards that are available can quite straightforwardly be integrated together. Now, when we talk about integration generally, we're not talking about everything's got to be identical and it's all got to have it's about making most efficient use of the management system structure and to try and prevent duplication. Absolutely. So when we look at some of the standards, energy management there, business continuity, we've got information security, 22,001, food safety management, medical devices, 13485, and 31,000, which is risk management. So there's a whole lot of management system standards that can be integrated together.
Yeah.
And elements of those standards. They are absolutely not all identical.
Indeed. So why should we think about integrating? You know, I guess many of you listening in are managers, maybe have responsibility within businesses, or maybe you are consultants that maybe advise businesses. But I guess if you were to put out a wish list on what maybe managers within a business might want, it might tick a number of the boxes on the slides that are shown there. Better utilisation of resources. Resources are expensive. We want to utilise those as best we can. Everybody wants less bureaucracy. We want all of the different areas of our organisations aligned. We all want to be pulling in the same direction and delivering company-wide objectives, whether those objectives relate to quality or health and safety or environment or energy, whatever they are, they should all be pulling us in the same direction. We all want to improve and make things more effective, more efficient, and have everybody working together as a team. The other areas that we tend to look at are the defining of responsibilities, authorities, making sure there is clarity within our organisations. Management and oversight made simpler, identification and prioritisation of improvements, and ultimately less infighting and barriers between the different departments. Everybody's striving to pull in the same direction. And if you look at it from a staff perspective, staff probably want the same thing, less frustration. We all want less paperwork. We want to understand what we do, what's our role within the organisation, how does what we do fit in with the much bigger picture. Everybody feeling part of a team, not working in silos so that I'm sat in my little office doing my bit without really any thought of what anybody else is doing. We all know what we're responsible for, how we play our parts, and obviously learning from our mistakes and trying not to make the same mistakes over and over again. So if managers and staff all want the same sort of thing, then why, in many, many organisations, do people not support the development and implementation of an integrated management system? Probably should say system on the end of that slide. But why do people not always do it? It seems so obvious. Staff want it, managers want it. Why don't we do it? Do you want to go through that one, Terry?
Certainly.
What does integration actually try and do then?
So what we're trying to achieve with integration, and I think we need to focus on these quite strongly, because it also, we're trying to allay some of the fears that people have when they consider or when looking at integration. So obviously we're trying to enable the organisation's mission objectives to be achieved. That's what every management system is trying to deliver, the policy and the objectives of the organisation. So it's got to mean something to that individual organisation, not just complying with the standard requirements. Looking at defining the processes and the interfaces of the organisation, so make it local to you and make it meaningful to you, not just for the sake of the standard, but to make it work within your own organisation. And it looks to integrate all activities, objectives and processes into one system so that people can use this common framework to go to the same place and the right place to get their information, know where things are within the system, know the structure of the organisation, etc. So it's all about providing some clarity and some standard application. It provides clear accountabilities and responsibility. It should enable processes, people and resources to be aligned, as we said earlier, about pulling together in a corporate direction. It can enable consistency of product and service. Again, making sure that the operation is continual across multiple shifts, for example, or multiple sites even, etc. It's all about having that standard method of approach and systematic approach to your services and your product. And try and control the spurious generation of documents so that there isn't 15 versions of a particular type of document, etc. So if people are doing different things all to achieve the same outcome, then it's looking at standardization of information and making that information effective and streamlined, which is an important element. It can form a very strong basis for training, because obviously as people change within organizations or come into organizations, then roles change, they'll need ongoing training and development. And having that clear structure, having that systematic way of approaching things and being able to find information and being able to train people to the same standard continually is an important element within the management standards. It also provides management with a tool to assist in their oversight roles. So the reporting mechanisms, what people report on and when, how that's been collated and delivered, all these things are all advantages of system integration. And it also helps looking at identifying what needs to be improved. And that can be at all sorts of levels within the organization, because improvement could be at a quite high level in terms of strategy and resources, but it could also be more local within a particular department or function. So it helps to identify those areas that need some improvement over time.
So it seems that, from what we've just said, developing an integrated management system would appear, on the face of it, to be common sense. However, as we all too often find out, the problem with common sense isn't that it's not too common. I don't know about you, Terry. I have a number of clients with integrated systems, but I still meet a lot of clients where they keep the standards separate. Do you find that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear about when we talk about integration. Everybody thinks it'll be a lot of hard work, a lot of we'll have to combine this and do that and do this and various things. But integration can happen over a period of time, and it's also about just preventing duplication. A lot of
Absolutely.
people are very fearful about, oh, well, if I combine everything together, it'll create this administrative monster. It'll become so big and so unwieldy, we won't be able to manage or function in the same way. That really isn't what we're talking about.
No.
We're talking about integration that delivers benefit, not hindrance
But
to
without
an
integration,
organization system.
what you can end up with, as I had last week, I won't say who the client was, but it was one of the country's port operators here in the UK, and I was around auditing with them, visiting the same sites in some cases that I'd been to earlier in the year. In the spring, we went to a site to look at how they manage energy, and then last week we were at the same sites looking at how they manage environment. And I'm trying to encourage them to tie those two together, to look at energy and environment as one system, one integrated system, and we can then combine our visits. So it's avoiding duplication. So there's all sorts of knock-on benefits, not just benefits within the business. You might think this is a strange thing for us to say. It does reduce your number of audit days. Generally, I think it's 20%, isn't it, Terry? There's a 20% reduction if you look at integrating your system. So 20% reduction in audit time.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on from that particular slide. So if we were sitting down to think about setting out on the journey to integrate, where should we start? What sort of things should we take into account as part of our journey, if you like, towards integration? I guess the first thing is the extent to which integration should occur, because on our audit reports, one of the pull-down menus that we select is the level of integration, and I think there's three options, isn't there? There's full integration, partial integration, or no integration. And partial integration might mean that you only look at integrating certain parts. So, for instance, you might have a combined management review. You might have an internal audit program that actually looks at all the different areas of the standards that you've got, but it's just one internal audit program that might go off and look at environment or health and safety or quality separately. You might decide you wanted to keep your legal registers separately if you've got environment and health and safety. So there's all the decisions about which elements. Are we going to go for a full 100% integration, or are we going to just integrate certain bits of the system? And that is a possibility. There's also an issue to think about the cultural aspects of the business and the style of management that you might have within the business. Could you be forcing people to work together that traditionally haven't worked together? Could that cause a problem? has there been too much empire building going on? So are people overly protective of their bits of the business, and maybe not want to share what they're doing with maybe other areas of the business? Have we got the competency? Have we got the know-how within the business to pull all of this together, or do we need to get any support in helping us with this integration? What about legislation? Is it something we're going to try and pull together into one a register? Certainly, I think some of my clients now have got 4 standards all integrated. So they've got energy, environment, quality, and health and safety. And 3 of those standards require you to pull together legislation. So how are all of those different legislative requirements going to be pulled together, including requirements from customers, which is probably more relevant to 9001. But ultimately, as we set out on the journey, as you would with any other journey that you're going on, to make sure that you know where you want to end up. It's no good setting out without a defined endpoint. So in other words, what do we want out of the integration process? And I will keep going, Terry, just on this one, if you don't mind. Obviously, all of the standards follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act. For those of you that have an interest in quality, that's known as the Deming cycle. And they all of the different standards follow this Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is one of the things that makes it easier to integrate. And it's that Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle that the Annex SL document is ultimately based on. In a previous life, when I used to do a lot more teaching of all of this sort of stuff, and I'm going back about 15 years now to when I worked as a consultant, one of the ways I used to try and think of integration is to think of a Christmas tree. Pretty poor looking Christmas tree, if I'm honest, but it was the best one I could find from some of the clip arts and drawings that we've got. So the way to think of an integrated management system is as a bare Christmas tree. So there's a number of clauses within the standard that are within the standard, should I say, that are common across every standard. So they've all got context. They've all got needs of interested parties. They all require a policy. They've all got an element of competency in there. They've all got documents that you need to control and manage. They've all got some degree of operational control. They all require internal auditing. They all require non-conformance and corrective action. They all require a management review. So all of those bits of the standard, the common building blocks, are the bare Christmas tree. Once we've got that common structure in place, as you would when you get the Christmas tree out of its box, or you come home with the Christmas tree from the supermarket, you start to decorate it. So we start to hang some baubles on. So these are the bits that are not common. So there are bits within quality that are not common to all of the other standards. Things like product identification and traceability, design. Some of those areas are you can't be fairly unique, are unique to those elements of the standard. So you start to build from the bare Christmas tree, if you like. You're starting to now build all of the different areas that you might consider. And I've only taken the 4 that I tend to work with: quality, environment, health, safety, and energy. And you're just populating the system then with the bits that are standalone. So health and safety has some unique elements. Energy requires an energy review. Environment asks for aspects and impacts. So these are the bits that you're then putting onto this model, which is the core structure of the management system. And ultimately, if you get them all together, you end up with a fully integrated management system with the various bits, if you like, the unique bits as part of that system. So one of the things I want us to look at, and if you can pick up on this bit, Terry, is to start to think about what are those common elements. Now, I've already alluded to some of them anyway, but this next slide starts to get us thinking a little bit about the common elements that are around all of the different standards?
So yeah, as Richard rightly says there, the best place to start is looking at the standard applications, the common elements that apply across all the standards. So you've got to understand that, and you work on these first because you're going to get benefit across all the disciplines of the various standards with these elements being built. Now, context and needs of interested parties, etc. Yeah, it's applicable in all, but it also means that some disciplines will have particular interested parties which may not be applicable to others. So think about how you're going to identify the interested party, which elements of the integrated management system they are applicable to, and making it clearly understood for people that are going to use this information what their interests are as interested parties. So who the interested parties are and what does that interested party mean to your organisation, and what does that mean your organisation has to deliver to meet that requirement for that interested party. So that's the core sort of context and interested parties element. And like I say, that does vary between, here in the UK, for example, the Health and Safety Executive and the Environmental Agency, two separate interested parties, but they can be put together in an integrated management system as interested parties, and as long as it's clearly understood what those different bodies require, that's where we want to be clear. So it's not about diluting the clarity of the content, it's just making that content accessible within the management system rather than having it in numerous places. There's obviously clause 5, looking at leadership. So the leadership of the organisation, and there may be different roles and responsibilities there. So there may be an environmental manager, there may be an energy manager, there may even, or people with multiple titles within their job role. All these roles and responsibilities need to work together.
Yeah.
So although there may be individuals given responsibility for various elements, the information needs to work collectively for the whole of the organisation and be defined for that organisation. People need to understand where to go to, what are their responsibilities, what are their limits of authority, etc., when it comes to all of this.
Have you come across many integrated policies, Terry?
Yeah, integrated policies are quite common, but there's a lot. There's also I find a lot of people still like to have the clarity of individual policies per discipline, shall we say, because there are discipline-specific requirements in each of the policies. They can be combined, and it's not that difficult to do, but you've got to make sure that those commitments are there for all the disciplines that are covered in an integrated policy. So a lot of organisations still like to have individual policies, so there's still some clarity there, but there's no reason from our point of view or from an effectiveness point of view why policies can't be integrated across multiple disciplines.
I was with a client yesterday, went into a construction company, went on site, and in the cabin, the notice board was about half full of policies. I think there was 11 policies up on the notice board.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting they could all have been combined, because, for instance, there was a policy on drugs and alcohol. But some of those, I think there was about 5 covering various aspects of health and safety.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those could have been combined into say, the health and safety policy. I think there was 4 covering environment and various bits of environment, sustainability, and energy, all separate. So it can get out of hand sometimes, having lots and lots of policies. And I guess the question is, if you've got 11 policies on a notice board, who's actually going to read them anyway?
Yeah.
Or are they there just because, the assessor's coming, the assessor will expect to see them all? So it's a lot, again, trying to avoid this duplication, I think. And certainly some of the most effective policies that I've seen maybe, because I was used to say that you should try and keep a policy to one page, but sometimes what I find is that there is an integrated policy which covers all of the standards on the front page, and then there may be 2 or 3 sections. So that there might be a smaller section on health and safety, a smaller section on environment, making sure that the policy has then covered all of the requirements of the respective standards.
And that's the key thing, really, especially when it comes to policy, because that's the primary commitment from the organisation, that the whole rest of the management system is there to deliver that policy and that strategy for that organisation.
Yeah.
So it is important. So it is important to have that policy that's clear, and also to fit the culture of the organisation. So it does depend a great deal on the nature of the organisation and the sections within that, or the sectors that the organisation operates in.
Another area where there's a lot of overlap is clause 6, risks, opportunities, compliance obligations. So most of the all of the standards require you to think about risk. And at the end of the day, is there a huge amount of difference between an environmental aspects and impacts evaluation and a health and safety risk assessment? You're assessing different types of risk, but the principle again is more or less the same. And I've seen many companies now. I'm fairly new, if I'm being honest, to health and safety assessing. It's something I've been started doing over the last few weeks. But I'm starting to see a number of businesses that use the same methodology for their health and safety risk assessments as they do for their aspects and impacts. Maybe some of the wording in terms of the level of risk is slightly different, but it's the same methodology. I'm seeing people with fully integrated legal registers or compliance obligations. And coming out of all of that, the objectives, there's a lot of overlap on the objectives. A lot of overlap, particularly between, say, health and safety objectives and environmental objectives. I don't see. Sorry, go on, Terry.
I mean, on the point of objectives there, even in organisations, let's say with 9,000, 14,000, so you're looking at a quality management system and environmental system, where organisations are then setting objectives to reduce waste and increase yield and reduce energy consumption, well, they can sit very nicely across at least quality and environment without any conflict whatsoever, because obviously any improvement in yield performance is greatly received, so it makes your quality of your organisation is improving, but it's also an environmental improvement. So you've got to look at things as an overview strategically within the organisation and make it work for multiple benefits as appropriate without losing focus.
Yeah. Clause 7, another clause. I suspect that clause is almost identical across all of the different standards. Certainly the 4 standards that I tend to work with now. There are a few little differences. So, for instance, health and safety has a little bit more of a requirement in terms of involvement and what's the phrase, Terry? I was going to say it's not collaboration, but
well, integration and engagement with workers, really.
That's the phrase I couldn't think of. Engaging with the workforce, engaging with people, and looking at employee representation. But generally, they all have exactly the same. You could look at the competency clause in every standard almost, and it would be the same.
Yeah.
The wording would almost be identical. The communication clause, again, a couple of very minor differences. 50,001 has a formal requirement for a feedback loop to allow people to bring forward suggestions in terms of improving energy. But generally, every clause in every standard in clause 7 is going to be more or less the same. And it's the same with clause 10.
Yeah.
Improvement, how we handle non-conformances and corrective action, and the continual improvement clause. That again is standard across all of the different management standards. Where the main differences tend to come is particularly, I think, going to be in clause 8.
Yeah.
Because clause 8 is how you actually plan and put into place the controls to manage the thing that the standard is setting out to manage. So the way you handle operational control for health and safety might be slightly different to how you would handle it for quality. And that's, I think, where the greatest difference would come. But still, the principles are the same. That something's been identified as a risk in clauses 6, and then at clause 8, you have to put some controls into place to manage that. The biggest difference, I think, is quality for clause 8. Quality, I think, runs to about 4 or 5 pages for clause 8 on operational control, whereas the other standards, it's probably maybe a page, something like that.
Yeah.
And again, in clause 9, there's a few differences there, monitoring and measurement particularly, but generally, even in clause 9, there's quite a lot of different sort of differences in there, but there's still a common theme running through that you've got to monitor something, you've got to measure how well you're doing, analyze what we're doing. This is sort of the check-in bit of the Plan, Do, Check, Act.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as I hope you're starting to see, there's quite a lot of commonality across all of these standards. And even in the areas where on the first sort of oversight, you might think there's a bit of difference, there's still common themes running through all of this.
We may all have seen, just quickly there, we may all have seen examples there of, let's say, procedural controls for a particular process or activity. And within that, it will say, well, press button this, but it may also say, but make sure, you know, you're wearing the right protective equipment, you're going to put your waste in that. So you can integrate process controls and information very simply in a lot of cases. So it's to prevent this duplication, and it's easier then to control rather than having 3 sets of instructions or 4 sets of instructions to undertake the same task. So that's what we're talking about.
All of the standards require a process approach. And you're right, I've seen many occasions now whereby there is maybe an instruction, maybe a work instruction on how to operate a particular process. And there's just one instruction, and it will tell you from a quality perspective how to operate it, as you say, which buttons to press, how to set it. It'll tell you how to deal with the waste. It'll tell you about the health and safety aspects, maybe what levels of PPE we require. And all of this is in one process control documentation, covering all the things that you need to know on how to manage that particular process. One of the tools that's readily available to anybody, it's on our website, and I think when you get the copies of the slides, you will be able to click on these links. One of the tools that we've put together, which is actually proving quite a popular tool, is an Annex SL comparison tool. And it goes through the main standards. Now, except it doesn't cover every single standard, but it covers the main, so it covers the main 4, if you like, first of all, 9001, 14, 45 and 50, but then goes on to cover 27,001, 20,000, 22,301 and 5501. And it goes through all of those standards clause by clause and picks out the common areas. So a lot of the work has been done already by us in terms of setting you out on that road to integration. And it's a very, very popular tool for people to have a look at and just see where we can start to think about pulling all of these together. As I say, there's a link on there. You can actually, part of the implementation guides, and you can actually start to pull this together. Right, first question. Could we ever encounter any conflict between the standards? What do you reckon, Terry?
I wouldn't say it was conflict. I think there's occasionally some misinterpretation of what's required. As we've said, the structure of the standards and the way the standards are written in a generic form in terms of, because they apply to multiple types of organisation covering multiple sectors, etc. I think there can be misinterpretations about what the standards are trying to deliver. The main thing is you've got to look at what that means to your organisation and to your service provision, etc. And I think it's good to be clear on that. So it's not really conflict as such, but it can be difficult to to split them apart, so to speak, to think, are we actually doing that by doing whatever?
I would tend to say, Terry, I think that any perceived conflict, I think you sort of alluded to it in what you said there, that the conflict comes from people's interpretation of the standard.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people being overprotective of their little bit of the organisation. And sometimes unwilling to give up on things, or maybe people who are empire building, perhaps. But I don't think the standards themselves actually have any conflict in them.
No.
I think it's how people interpret and maybe become overly possessive of their bit of the business, if you like. And that's where we start to see some of the conflict. Because at the end of the day, all of the standards, literally, all they ask you to do is to identify what the biggest risks are in terms of quality, environment, health, safety, and so on. What are the greatest opportunities? And then to put things in place to actually resolve the risks or mitigate the risks and to take advantage of the opportunities. And if everything's pulling in the same direction, there shouldn't really be any conflict. I can't think of particularly any conflict between legislative areas because, again, everything's trying to pull in the same direction, that we do things in a safe way that's safe to people, safe for the environment, use resources in an appropriate manner. So I'm not sure, Richard, as to whether I can think of any areas. I've certainly not come across any in any of the audits I've done where there's particularly been conflict, other than where maybe there's a little bit of interpretation. I do have a couple of clients, and this is where it can cause a little bit more of an issue, maybe in terms of conflict, where they have a number of single standards, and for some reason, they've had different certification bodies managing the different bits of it. And then when they've tried to integrate it, you end up with maybe ourselves and another certification body almost auditing the same part. Now, again, there shouldn't be any conflict there, but again, sometimes different assessors might view things slightly differently. And what I don't think does work is having an integrated system where you've got different certification bodies looking at different parts of the system. Have you come across that, Terry, at all?
Yeah, like I say, it is this perception, isn't it, in terms of, because some organisations, various elements of different requirements, let's say quality, may be a higher profile to that particular organisation depending on what they do, and there could be other areas that aren't given the same emphasis. So people and individuals and cultures of organisations, including the leadership, may have a greater focus on particular elements or emphasis on particular elements, and that's where you can generally come across some areas of friction, shall we say. And
the
it's
only
certainly
area, sorry, well,
it really is something that you do need to think about, because it's very easy said, let's just go and integrate this, but you also have to think of the dynamics of the individuals and the structure of the organization to say, how are we going to make this work, and over what period of time we're going to make this work.
The only area, while you were talking, Terry, I was just trying to think of whether I could come from the sort of my long years at NQA, whether I could think of any. The only area I can particularly think of where I have come across any conflict, thinking about it, is occasionally where there might be a bit of conflict between, say, customer requirements in a quality perspective and maybe the business's environmental requirements. I'm thinking on things like packaging. So I've had a couple of occasions where customers require a particular type of packaging, but actually what the customer requires isn't necessarily the best environmental option. So by meeting your customer requirements, you are having to maybe give way slightly in terms of the best environmental option. However, one of the options also within 14001 is to try and influence supply chain issues.
Yeah.
So maybe there is an opportunity to say to your client, well, actually, I know you want single-use cardboard boxes. That's not quite what we're all about anymore. Can we talk to you about returnable packaging, for instance? But yeah, I've occasionally come across a little bit of conflict there where customer requirements, and I think it's started to change because most of a company's customers now are likely to have some interest in environment anyway. So therefore, most people want to work together now to make sure that the whole supply chain is being as environmentally sustainable as it can be. So this may be things from a while ago.
Yeah.
Another question just cropped up there. If a client decides to go with a partial integration, is there a need to involve NQA or their auditor, or could it be a surprise for the NQA auditor on his visit? Go on then, Terry, you answer that one.
I would always say that it's better to keep your certification body informed of your plans and whatever, because we may be able to support you in terms of comparison tools and various things and stuff that you may not be aware of. So in terms of that, I would always say it's always best to keep your certification body involved in that process, and especially where it could mean we may be able to revise the duration of the visit, or it may need additional time to ensure that we have suitable coverage within the audit planning arrangement. So I would always say keep your certification body and therefore the auditor informed of any significant changes, shall we say, in terms of status of the organisation and its system.
What I try and do with my clients, if I'm with businesses that are not integrated, not integrating the systems, usually at some point within the audit, even if it's over lunchtime while we're having a sandwich, I will probably raise the sort of discussion about integration. Ask if if they've actually thought about it, and usually towards the end of the closing meeting, I've a pretty good idea as to whether over the next 12 months they're going to start thinking about integration. I don't think I've ever had a surprise where I've turned up and suddenly found that it's suddenly all integrated, because that would actually be a problem. Because if a client had 3 separate systems, you might find that you've got 3 different NQA auditors turning up.
Yeah.
And we would need to know. It would actually be quite problematic, I think, if we suddenly turned up to do, if I turned up to do, say, a 14,001 audit, and suddenly out of the blue, I suddenly found out that, oh, it's all fully integrated now, didn't you know? So yes, keep in touch. It doesn't do any harm. It doesn't cost you anything to talk to us. And either speak to NQA themselves or just send your assessor an email and just say, we're thinking about integrating, can we have a chat? And you know, we do like to talk, we do like to keep in touch. Mary, what do the speakers think about an organisation implementing an IMS from the very beginning? I would say go for it. I think if you've got no systems in place and you're starting to think about integrating, starting to think about maybe, let's say, implement, let's just pick 2 of the standards, 2 that quite often fit together. If you were going to start to implement 9001 and 14,001, absolutely start integrating it right from the word go. Think about that Christmas tree. Think about the structure of your management system. Think about those common elements. Write those first of all, and then start to think about the various areas. So work through, excuse me, work through the standard. Think about the different bits that you need, and then start to think about how we put this together. I would actually think that that's easier than trying to integrate some historically set up systems. You know, the culture should be a lot easier. Everybody will be used to working together right from the start. So absolutely, if you've got the choice, I wouldn't write 3 separate standards or 3 separate systems. Get certified and then decide to try and integrate them. Start at the beginning, integrate them right from the beginning, and then when you have your stage 1 and stage 2, the stage 1 will be able to give you an idea as to the success of the integration process. And a stage 1 assessment is all about looking at the documented system, and your assessor will be able to give you some good information and some good pointers as to how well you've integrated. Oh, thank you, Chris. Hello team, superb presentation again. We like that, don't we, Terry? We like a bit of praise on a
Oh
Friday.
yeah, well, you can never have too much praise. How are you doing, Chris? Nice to see you again.
It's 10 to 3. Thank you, Mary. It's 10 to 3. I'm quite happy to hang around till 3 o'clock. We'd said that there'd be about 45 minutes of talking and a chance for some questions at the end. There are a couple of slides left, but they're back to what I call the contractual obligation slides again, that talk a little bit about some of the other training courses that we do, which we will run through towards the end. But just while we're in the sort of question mode, has anybody else got anything that we haven't covered? Anything that you think, oh, I wish they'd talked about that? We've got 5 or 10 minutes if you want us to talk about anything. Or, and I'm quite happy to do this now as well, if you have any specific questions about any of the standards that Terry and I manage. And obviously, if you decide to start asking questions about 27,001, we might struggle. But if you've got any specific health, safety, environment, or energy questions, I don't mind taking any of those at this point either. What about software tools?
Yeah, interesting question. There is a lot of software out there, to be fair, and they all claim to integrate and make it easier. And some of them actually do a brilliant job of that. And some don't do it as well as their sales literature would claim.
No.
And at the end of the day, it's a decision for the organization itself, because only you know your resource availability, you know the demands of your own organization, you know your your own culture, etc. So realistically, software tools can be very effective without any shadow of a doubt. And all I would say is it's really down to each individual organization to make that decision based on their needs.
I'm going to come back to my Christmas tree yet again. I think going and buying a software tool is a bit like browsing through, say, the Argos catalogue and looking to see if I can buy an artificial Christmas tree. That's fine, you'll get it home, but if you stick it in the corner of your lounge, it won't do very much. So you need to think about, is the software tool I'm buying going to be suitable? The software tool will help you with all of those key areas and will give you the structure, but you've still got to then decorate it yourself. So you can't rely on a software tool doing everything for you, but make sure you pick the right software tool that will allow you, give you the freedom to then put in the relevant sort of quality, environment, health and safety bits that you might want to decorate the tree with. So what's this?
There's another question here.
Go on, Terry, you take that one.
So another question here. So we already have an integrated system for 2 standards, 9 and 27, looking to incorporate 14, 20 and 45. Any pitfalls I should be aware of? I think all I would say there is keep standing back from the system and looking for duplication. Where do we already do that? What have we already got? What do we already do? And make sure that fits in suitably without trying to reinvent any wheels.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas, if you've only got 9 and 27, one of the areas that you won't probably be as mature with is sort of the compliance obligations bit, or the legal register, as some of the standards still call them. If I'm honest, I'm not an expert on 27. I know quite a lot about 9001. I know the basics of 27. But I think the standards that you're talking about, certainly 14 and 45, key parts of those are the sort of formal risk assessments and the legislative sides of it. And I think that's an area that you might just need to make sure that you're up to speed on in terms of how you integrate the probably more structured compliance obligations that you find in environment and health and safety, as opposed to 9001, which is going to be more around client requirements, customer requirements. So I think that's maybe an area to just think about, Neil. Chris, one of my favourite questions, I'm glad somebody's asked that. Will 50,001 exist in 5 years? I have my doubts. However, there is a little bit of hope on the horizon, I think. I'm guessing what's behind your question, Chris, is this requirement for continual improvement in energy performance, which is alone in all of the standards. that if you don't continually improve, then you get a major non-conformance. I don't know whether you're aware, Chris, it's worth having a look. And if you want to get in touch with me at some point, I can point you in the right direction. And I'll give you my email address, and I guess Terry's towards the end. There is currently an ongoing UK government consultation about how 3 different things fit together and how they may add value. And it's looking at 50,001, it's looking at SECR, and it's looking at ESOS, and looking to see how all of those 3 areas can actually work, because there's a bit of duplication. So I think there is some recognition that 50,001 has missed a trick, because 50,001 purely looks at how much energy you use and not where that energy has come from. So I think in answer to the question, yes, it will. Whether it will look quite the same or not, I really don't know. Thank you, Chris. I agree. But if you want, I can talk forever on that subject. You're on my favourite topic there about 50,001. I'll come back to that. There's a longer question from Neil, which I'll come back to in a minute. Will 9001 at some point be the only quality standard? Well, when it was written, it was meant to be the only quality standard. And unfortunately, people have gone off on tangents and decided, well, we need one for medical devices, we need another one for automotive, we need another one for aerospace. And I think almost the Pandora's box has been opened, and all of these standards are going off in different directions. They're all based on 9001, but they all have sector-specific requirements. So if I'm honest, I think the answer to that's probably no. What do you reckon, Terry?
Yeah, the major thing is that they are, you know, to be fair to 9001, going back to Richard's Christmas tree analogy, then that is the structure. They do follow the basic principles, and then they bring in sector-specific requirements applicable to that service and provision for that sector. So I think it's unlikely now that they'll be withdrawn from that. And to be fair, it still adds value, doesn't it? It's still basically a 9001 system with sector-specific requirements.
Yeah. So, for instance, in aerospace, as you might expect, there's a much greater reliance on traceability. Because if you put a component into a plane and that component fails, you need to know where every single one of those components is.
And the same could be said for medical devices, for example.
Devices, that's right. So there's a lot more on traceability. That's right. If you suddenly find that somebody's heart valves are not working properly, you need to know where all the other ones might be. So and 9001 could probably manage that, but there are, as you just said, there are those specific sector requirements. I'm going to do a very, very last troll for any questions. Neil sort of added a bit of a comment that in a previous role they had 13485, and that doesn't always work well with the others. However, the good news is that he's already got a good legal register which incorporates a lot of the other standards. So thank you for that. You've got that in place. I will just start running through these final couple of slides, which talk a little bit about some of our advanced training courses. So you've sat through a webinar, which is a fairly general discussion. We do training courses on all of the individual standards. We do training courses on integration, but we also have a suite of advanced courses that sort of are much shorter and snappier, but sort of drill down into some of the areas that you'll find within the standards. So we can do courses on leadership, for instance. What is it about leadership? And that applies across all standards. It's not related to a particular standard. It's aimed at particularly leaders within organisations that might want to understand a little bit more in a fairly short and snappy way about what leadership might mean for them. So there's a number of areas in there that we run as advanced courses. That do we cover? I don't know, Terry. Do we cover 31,000? I think we do, don't we?
I think we do. It's not something I'm overly familiar with at this point, but
we do. Yes. The other big area which we cover, just as an aside, I want to get this in, is because it's very relevant just at the moment, is carbon neutrality and carbon accounting. That's a fairly new area for us. And we just, in fact, I sat through a long meeting this morning. We are about to become UCAS accredited, for carbon neutrality and carbon accounting. So anybody that wants to talk about that, give me a shout particularly. Do we cover it as training? I suspect we will somewhere. Give us a shout. I'm richard.walsh@nqa.com and Terry is terry.fisher@nqa.com. Send one of us an email and we'll look into that. But I'm sure we do, Chris. No worries. I think that's about it. It's 1 minute past 3. We've just about used up all our time.
And if anybody does have any sort of burning themes that they want coverage in for future webinars or any future events that you'd like to see NQA hopefully support you in, by all means, send us an email. As I say, Richard just give you our email address, but you can also email NQA direct. So if you do have any themes or anything like that, don't be frightened to let us know, because it is useful for us to get feedback direct from our, from our user group of what they need and where we can help.
Yeah. So you will get next week now, because it's Friday afternoon. Next week you will get an email from Natalie. I think it'll come from Natalie in the training and marketing team, with a copy of the slides from today and also a link to a recording of this. And if you've forgotten what our email addresses are, just reply to Natalie and she can direct anything that she thinks needs to come to us. So yeah, thanks, Chris. You have a great and safe weekend as well. If any of you are attending bonfires tonight, stay safe. I wouldn't expect you to bring a risk assessment for your bonfire, but just stay safe. It is in the UK, 5th of November, when we commemorate somebody trying to blow Parliament up. I shall go no further than that.
No, we haven't got enough time to go any further than that, Richard.
Can't go any further than that. So thank you. So thanks everybody. Have a great weekend, and as we said, keep in touch.
Thank you all very much. Cheers, then. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. See you all again sometime. Cheers, then.
Cheers.
Bye bye.